Hi everyone, this is Frank and welcome to my wood shop. This is a video of a series of videos on the build for my base cabinets along my north wall of my shop. So today in this video we're going to start making the top for the three cabinets that sits between the radial arm saw and the chop saw. So it's been an interesting venture of making sure that my surface of both those saws are level and plumb. And the best way I found that for me to do that is to get my three cabinets over here screwed together, leveled out, and I have them completely level and plumb. So I'm going to go ahead and make the top, which is going to be a torsion box top, and put that onto those three cabinets, secure it to the cabinets, and then I can make the final adjustments on the other two cabinets for the radial arm saw and the chop saw to ensure that I have exact same height as well as that it's plumb and square to that tabletop. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of dimensions to make sure that that is perfectly square. As my wife said, she said just put it up there, don't worry about it. But again, as a perfectionist in woodworking, I want to make sure that whatever I put down on this table, which is a long length board, and I make that cut on the chop saw or I make it on the radial arm saw, that the board is actually being cut perpendicular or square, has a square edge. So, so that's why I'm taking a lot of time and effort going through these dimensions and going through this process to make sure that I have them level. I figured it's a lot better to do it this way by getting that table onto those three cabinets, and then that'll be my surface that's as plumb and flat, and then be able to make the necessary leg adjustments on those floor levelers for the other two cabinets before I secure them to the three cabinets in the middle, making it one big long bank of cabinets. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll take you through some of the design phase of how I'm going to do that, and let's get started. So this is what my I made a prototype, and I didn't put them together, but this is what my torsion box top is going to look like. It'll have a base top, and then it'll have the small pieces that will go inside, and they'll be in a honeycomb pattern. And then I'm going to put a plywood top and then most likely an MDF top. But I just used some scrap pieces of plywood to put this together to make sure I had the right height. And as you can see, the table here is not, it's a little low on the front here, but it's a little high on the back side. So this cabinet, which is not secured to the center cabinets, is going to have to be adjusted. But so there's some changes I'm going to be doing to this prototype. And that is, I'm going to take this bottom board and I'm going to make it flush to the front of the cabinets, which is 32 inches. And of course the, well, I guess I want to call these strips for the torsion box will also start back here. So the only thing I'm going to have, which is going to be a 2-inch hangover, will be the top two pieces, which would be the plywood and then the MDF. And then I will trim this part out with Paduke. It'll probably be trimmed on the side 3/4 of an inch, and it'll also be trimmed underneath 3/4 of an inch. So it'll be like an L shape, like I did on my outfeed table. So that's the one change I'm going to make, so that this doesn't look so big, and all I have is this 2 inches that'll be sticking over that I could use to clamp to. Okay, so you can see I'm going to be taking it all the way to the back, and then I'll end up putting some sort of a filler piece underneath this radial arm saw table. But it'll come all the way out here, and the one thing I did do is when I built this cabinet for the chop saw, I probably should have made it a little bit wider, because when you put your chop saw at 45 degrees, look how it's hanging over the edge of that cabinet. So what I'm going to do when I build out this top, this bottom sheet again will be the come right to the flush of the cabinets. I'll come to the edge of the cabinets, And since this cabinet actually has to go up about 1/8 of an inch, that's okay, because that gives me a little bit more room to get my hand underneath here. And I'm basically just going to have a cutout up here for my hand to be able to get in there and to lock the chop saw at 45 degrees. So that shouldn't be too big of a problem. I'll end up doing the same thing over here once I put that cabinet in. So I got that all figured out. I kind of put some space blocks here to determine I'm coming back 2 inches. I'll have it cut back 3/4 of an inch because I'll do a Paduke trim in here so you don't see the live edge of the plywood. And I think that's going to be pretty much it. So let's go ahead and go over to the plans and I'll show you what I'm doing. Okay, my crude drawing. Here is the bottom sheet, and the bottom sheet is going to be 67 3/8 of an inch wide, okay, and it'll come out to 32 1/8, because that's, although the cabinets are coming out 32 inches, they're sitting back from the wall about 1/8 of an inch, being that they're plumbed, okay. So that bottom piece is going to be completely square. Then the mid and the top, the midpoint is going to be a plywood, and the top is going to be MDF. It will be 33.5 inches deep, and that is that'll take in consideration the 3/4 of an inch that I'm going to end up trimming out the face of this top. Okay, so with a 2-inch overhang, it would have been 34, and 34 1/4 was going to be. So anyway. Then over here, here's my trim out. I'm going to be coming back 22 1/4 inches, make the cut in. The cut will be 2 3/4 inches in, and then come back straight out, and this will have Paduke trim to it. Again, the top is going to end up having a 3 5/8 inch thick top, so with that 2-inch overhang. So that's my plans to do the plywood cutout. So now I'm going to bring the plywood in, go ahead and cut the bottom, cut the mid, since I can get those two out of one sheet, and then I'll have to bring in the piece of MDF to go ahead and cut the MDF piece too. So let's get started. Okay, so I have the bottom sheet that's down, and I have it on my outfeed table, and this is where a torsion box comes in. I mean, really handy. So I did a torsion box on this top, and so it's a honeycomb pattern. I believe they're like 4 or 5 inches thick, you know, the honeycomb. And so it had a bottom, it had the honeycomb, and then it had a plywood top, and then it has the MDF top. And I'm basically going to be doing the same thing for this top between the chop saw and the radial arm saw. So first thing I did is I went and outlined the strips. Okay, so this is the right thickness. When I put 2 more levels, a sheet of plywood and a sheet of MDF, it's the exact thickness that I need on top of those cabinets that will match the top of the chop saw and the radial arm. And I did a test piece just to make sure that that would work. Over here, this is where I did that cutout for the chop saw, so that when it comes over to a 45, that it has room to still tuck inside here. I can get my hand, make the changes, lock it down, and move it. So that's what this little corner is. And I did make room so that I do have room to put a 3/4 inch piece of Paduke in here and here to go up to the very top, so it matches the front. So that distance is calculated for that 3/4 inch piece of hardwood. So this is all flat. So since this is a torsion box, I know it's perfectly flat. So when I took this piece of plywood down, it had a little bit of a cup. I put a couple of my fire extinguishers down on top of it to give it some weight, and it's perfectly flat. As a matter of fact, if I come down here and reach in, you can see here, I could push down on this, and this thing is perfectly flat. Okay, to the torsion box top here. So I know once I put all these strips on to make a honeycomb pattern, that as long as I keep it flat and I keep some weight on it, and I put that honeycomb pattern in. When I go and put that next top of plywood on top to nail it to that honeycomb pattern, this top will be completely flat. I mean completely flat. So that's the nice thing about working off of a torsion box top. That way you know you've got it exactly flat, so anything that you build on top of it will be flat. So I've got all my strips cut here. I can't remember how many I went and cut. I'll be putting strips. I did dividers here about every 6 inches, and then about every 9 inches I'll be putting the smaller strips, and we'll make a honeycomb out of this. So let's continue on. Well, as you can see, I started the torsion box honeycomb setup, and so I've got a stop block on my chop saw to go and cut these smaller pieces. They're like at 5.5 inches, and then I've already done one row of the honeycombing, gluing, and brad nailing it to the plywood. And again, the plywood is staying really flat. So what's the process? And I'll kind of go over this with you. So I'm using a jig here. This is the distance that I want between each of my small 5.5 pieces. You can see it kind of fits inside. And I may be a little bit off in my measurements, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. As long as you've got a good honeycomb pattern on a torsion box, then you're going to be pretty good. So now that I started off with a full piece, I'm going to brick pattern it to give it some strength as well as to be able to give me some area to nail in. Because if I would still put it right here, then I'd have a problem trying to nail into the side of the plywood. So I make a spacer here that is half the thickness or half the distance of the other spacer. I'll put that down, nail it, glue it, nail it, put this down, glue it and nail it, and continue that type of process all the way down until I get all of these small 5.5 pieces in. Then I'll come back and cut the piece that's long and put it on top and start the pattern all over again. So let me go ahead and put this on the tripod, and I'll kind of show you what I'm doing. Okay, so that is now done. You can see I have all the pieces sitting up here, and all I have to do is cut the long length, glue that, put it in. I'll probably put a brad in each location to keep it down tight onto the plywood, and then I will then also put a brad in on the ends of these pieces. Okay, now I'm going to check to make sure all the brads are seated below the plywood just slightly so that I don't have any issues when I put the other top of this torsion box on. So that's how you create the honeycomb, and we'll just continue on with that same pattern, starting off with the larger block at the end. and continuing down until we finish the last 3 rows. All right, so the honeycomb process is done. So that is how you create the foundation for a torsion box. Okay. So I'm going to let this dry for the next few hours, and the next step is going to apply the next skin in this torsion box, which will be plywood, and that will actually extend over by 2 inches because that's the extension that's going to go beyond the cabinets, because this is right at the face of all the cabinets. So the extension will go out 2 inches. That way I've got something I can clamp onto if I wanted to clamp something onto this torsion box. So we'll go ahead and bring the sheet of plywood in and cut that up. In the meantime, while this is drying, I'm probably going to go ahead and make some marks on the outside where all of my runners are, and the series in the vertical runners, because I have obviously some of these are running in 1 dimension and 2 of them running in a different dimension. So I want to make sure that when I put this plywood down that I transfer those lines so I know exactly where to put my brad nails in, because I'm going to brad nail the heck out of this when I put that skin on. So that's the next step. Of course, I always put my label inside something and date it. So, all right, let's get going. All right, so I've got the top of the torsion box now placed on the honeycomb. So you can see where I've got my cutout for the chop saw arm. And I used a slow setting glue, Titebond 3. Gives me a little bit more working time and a little easier to work with when you're trying to get something like this in position and nailed on. So I used brads. I used 1.5 inch brads to go through here. You can see my lines. I actually drew lines on the side where these pieces of the honeycomb are at, so that I could put in a grid pattern of brads, and that's what I did here. So, and I've got my fire extinguisher sitting on top, the middle of it, to give me some weight. And once this glue dries, it'll dry overnight. And then I'll come in the morning and I'll start working on cutting up the last top sheet, which is the exact same size as this one, but it'll be out of MDF. And that'll be the final surface for this bench top that's going to be along the whole north wall. So, time to dry and sit back and relax. All right, this is now done, and I put it in place mainly because I needed to get my outfeed table back to start milling up the Badook. But just give you an idea of the layering again. So this is the base. Here is the honeycomb strips and plywood, which makes the sandwich, and then MDF on top. So I don't typically glue my MDFs. I like MDF for a top because it's flat. It takes varnish really good. It soaks it up really well, with polyurethane, I should say. But I want to be able to change this out at any point in time in case I need to, whether it gets damaged, gets dinged, something else happens over time and I want to take that top off. I can then unscrew the top and take it off and put a new one on. So I'm not too concerned about the screw holes because I've gotten pretty well flush about getting any kind of debris that would cause me to get hung up with the fence. So obviously, again, I got some leveling to do with this table saw, but looks pretty good. So kind of go down here. So the next step is to trim it out in Badook, and so I'll cut a piece of Badook that'll be about this long. and another piece of Padook. So it'll be like an L-shaped Padook. It'll go up inside the bottom and it'll come up a little bit, and I'll use my router to flush trim it to the top. So that's what I did on my outfeed table, and it works really good. That way I've got a good clamping surface, and the edging is actually attached from the bottom on that L shape, so there really isn't anything that's attached to the MDF. Therefore, if I need to remove the MDF, I can. So next step is to start to do the milling process on some Padook. So I've got one board there and another one here, which is the right length. I'll start planing it and edging it to get it down to 3/4 of an inch, and cutting and milling it up to the size and the thickness, or the size and the width that I need to trim out that top. So I'm going to get started on that. What's really interesting, what I really like about this this wood Padook from Africa, is this is my two boards that I milled up. So I jointed them on my joiner and just got done doing a surface plane to get them down to 3/4 of an inch. And if you can see just how orange they are. But if you look at this strip right here, that's also Padook. And just look at the difference over time. I mean, it didn't get this reddish brown or reddish orange color from finishing. It got that way just from over time. Padook will get darker as it sits around, whether it's sealed, or varnished, polyurethane, whatever you may put on it. Over time it gets dark, just like cherry does. But this is one of the woods I love working with for milling, but also I love for the accent pieces because it really does turn to a very dark, deep, rich. Just to give you an idea, my cabinets are done in Padook, and look at the difference in the color over time. Okay, and I love that deep, dark, rich color. When I put these cabinets together and built them, they were all orange, just like that. And I knew that over time it would turn to a very, very dark, almost a dark amber color. So just wanted to give you a little piece of information if you like working with Padook, if you've ever done it before, or you might want to try a project that's going to give you an accent piece where the color gets darker over time. So anyway, let's get back to our show. Well, I milled up the Padook and cut the two strips. One is the bottom strip that will go underneath that 2-inch hangover, and what I call the face strip. And I have to join those two together in order to attach it to the bottom of that overhang on the countertop. So what I did, you can see here's the L shape, okay, and this is the bottom piece. So, and this is the front or the face of the cabin, or the tabletop, okay, that torsion box top. So you can see where I joined them. And what I did is I made the marks, as you can see there. Get it at a better angle here. And I did biscuit joinery in order to, and I can see my marks, in order to give me a very good face flush. Okay, so it's nice and flush to each other. I'll scrape the glue off once it dries, and this will be a nice piece. Once it's done, you will not be able to see this seam, because this part of the board is ripped from the bottom of this board. So you can almost see when I go down to this area, that's the same knot. So by doing that, when you rip the two apart and you join them together, it kind of looks like this. This is the exact same type of construction. You got a board on the bottom, the one on top, and the board on the bottom right here, here's a seam. You can man, it's very difficult to see it, but that is 3/4 of an inch, and the rest of this is this top board. I glued it, I did a biscuit joint on this as well, screwed it from the bottom so you can feel a screw right here, so it attaches the two together, and then I just actually screwed up underneath the overhang, and this is the same concept that I'm going to be doing over on the countertop. Okay, so gonna let that dry, scrape off the glue. I have a slight cut to make here because I made it a little bit longer so that I can cut it to size, and then we will go ahead and attach it to this overhang on the torsion box top. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. All right, so we've got the front trim attached now to the torsion box top, and this looks pretty good. Got a little bit of a gap here. That's okay. That'll be covered. You can kind of see again how that looks. Now you're not going to see that end of it because it'll be covered underneath the lip of the radial arm saw table. So I made this top a little bit strong, like I did here on this table, and then I took a flush trim router bit and routed across, so now it's completely flush to the top of the MDF. So that's done. I had a little bit of an overhang of MDF here, which I did that purposely. I wanted to have a little bit of wiggle room. I didn't want to be short, I'd rather be long, and I took the flush trim router bit to that and flushed that up, so that's nice and flush. And so next step is I've got my clamps onto this top. It's clamping to my outfeed table, and next is to set up a guide to run the router on this line. This is where the T-track is going to go in. So I have one on both ends at 6 inches from the end. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up and route that with the router. All right, so I am done with the routing, and here you can see I've got the channel all done, and it is, let me get it to zoom here. I'm not going to get it to zoom. So anyway, it's done, routed out on both sides. Boy, is that ever messy routing MDF. But I got to cut the T-track to size, but it's a perfect fit. Fits great. So my next step is to cut the T-tracks to size, and this top is ready to go ahead and get sanded. Probably do 120 then 220 just to smooth out the top. I will round out the corners of the Paduke so I don't get a splinter, because this stuff is hard and those splinters hurt like heck if you get them off the edge because it's a pretty grainy wood. So anyway, I'm going to go and round off those edges, and then I'll probably go ahead and put on the polyurethane, and so that way I'll get the polyurethane in on the top, and I'll do that before I put the T-track in, because I don't want any polyurethane in the T-track, obviously. So once that's done, probably put 2 or 3 coats of rub-on poly, and once that's done, then it'll be ready to put into place again on top of the 3 shelves. And then my job is to check it for level and plumb against those 3 cabinets, and if it looks good, go inside the cabinet, screw down this top to the cabinets, and then screw the cabinets to the wall. That way I've got one solid block. So let's go ahead and start cutting these T-tracks and start sanding this top, and we'll start to do the polyurethaning. All right, so we're done with the polyurethane. I've got actually 3 coats. One rub-on, one I actually did like a flood and then rubbed off because MDF just soaks that stuff up. So, and I sanded it with 220 and then put another hand rub coat on. And you'll see whenever you do something like that on MDF, you will always have swirls and strokes of how you are applying the finish. You could probably put 10 coats on this thing before it finally goes away. And that's not what I'm doing for MDF, not for the shop. So anyway, it's done. It's going to be drying here for the next hour or so. I'll probably grab some lunch. I installed the T-tracks, so the T-tracks are done. They're installed. So that's accomplished. So the only thing I've got to do now is get some help and put this torsion box top onto those cabinets. Okay, so that's the next step, and then we'll level and plumb it, and that'll be it for this video in this series. So stay tuned. Well, we are done. So I've got the torsion box on top of the cabinet, and I spent some time leveling it and making sure that it is level between the 2 saws and level from the front to the back wall. So I had to get on my hands and knees and do some tweaking of the levelers on the cabinet, which worked really good. So I got it perfectly level in all directions. So my next step, I went underneath the cabinet and bolted the top with the runners, the stringers that I had between the cabinet walls. So that's attached, and the last thing I'm going to do is put some screws toward the back of the cabinet into the wall, probably just one for each of the cabinets, and that'll be completely secure. I'm not going to do that yet until my next step is to go and level the radial arm saw and its tabletop to this tabletop, and I'll be doing that by leveling out the cabinet levelers. And then over here, I'll be working with the chop saw to get the chop saw level with the table as well. So once that's completed, then my next step, I'm not sure yet if I'm going to make the fence to go between the 2, which is probably what I'm going to do. It would be nice to have that long fence there instead of just a short fence from the chop saw. And it'll work perfect with these T-tracks that I had embedded into the top. So I plan to make a fence with aluminum L, basically aluminum stock, an L stock, and some plywood and the Craig top track, so I can actually slide a stock along the top of that fence. So if I do that, I'll probably do a video specifically just on building the fence. Once that's done, then I'll continue down toward toward the west side of the shop and get the cabinet done on the other side of the radial arm saw, and then continue on down with the other bank of cabinets. So a lot of top to put together, although those will be a lot simpler because it really is just basically either a square top or a rectangle top. So it won't be too difficult to get those done. So anyway, that's it for this video in the series. Please stay tuned for additional videos coming up that will take you through the journey of completing this north wall cabinets, base cabinets along that shop wall. There you go, there you have it. So my name is Frank, this is Frank Woods Designs. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If this is your first time to my channel, please subscribe so you'll be notified of additional videos that come into my channel. Thanks so much for watching it. I hope what I did here is entertaining for you and maybe pick up some tips and tricks as well. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching. You have a great day.